Look, I am not going to sugarcoat this. The Bichette situation just went from, we'll probably figure it out, to, holy crap, this might actually happen in the span of about 48 hours. We just got a report that the Boston Red Sox aren't just casually interested in Toronto's shortstop. They're showing serious, legitimate, we're actually going to make a monet this guy interest. And if you are a Blue Jays fan sitting there thinking this is just off-season noise, just teams doing their due diligence, let me tell you why this is different. This isn't coming from some random Twitter account looking for engagement. This is Rob Bradford, a legitimate Red Sox insider, reporting that Boston is preparing to make a big push to lure Bichette away from Toronto. Think about what that means for a second. The Red Sox just came off a season where they made serious moves, adding guys like Alex Bregman and Garrett Crochet, turning themselves into a competitive team that pushed deep into the playoffs before car round. They have money to spend, they have holes to fill, and they're in the AL East, which means they see Bichette up close enough to know exactly what he's capable of when he's healthy and locked in. They watched him destroy their pitching for years. They know what he brings to a lineup, and now they want him on their side. Here is what makes this terrifying for Toronto. This is the first time all offseason that a team besides the Blue Jays has been heavily linked to Bichette. Sure, there have been whispers and speculation about various clubs having interest, but nothing concrete until now. The Red Sox making a serious push changes the entire dynamic of these negotiations. It creates a real alternative. It puts pressure on Toronto to either match whatever Boston offers or risk watching their homegrown star put on a different uniform and play 81 games a year in a division rival's stadium. The timing of this couldn't be worse either. We just came off a World Series appearance where the Blue Jays got within one game of a championship. The roster proved it can compete at the highest level. The core showed it belongs on that stage. And now, less than a month later, T here is a legitimate possibility that one of the most important pieces of that core could be gone. Not because he wants to leave necessarily, but because another team is willing to pay him what he's worth while Toronto hesitates or tries to get a discount. Jeff Poston dropped an article recently that added even more context to this whole situation. He mentioned that teams around the league haven't been scared off by Bo's defensive metrics at shortstop, which is notable because T here has been this narrative floating around that some organizations might only see him as a second baseman going forward. But Poston is saying the market views him as a legitimate shortstop, which only increases his value and the number of teams that might be interested. He threw out names like the Braves, Tigers, Yankees, Mets, Phillies. Basically, half the league has a reason to be involved if Bo hits the open market for real. The Blue Jays' ideal scenario here is pretty obvious. Sign Bo to something in the 8-year, $200 to $230 million range, move him to second base permanently, and let Andre Fimine handle shortstop duties. That's what they ran in the playoffs, and it works beautifully. Jimenez is legitimately one of the best defensive infielders in baseball. His value is maximized, and Bo, despite all the criticism about his defense, is still an elite offensive player who can anchor the middle of a lineup for years. But here is the problem. Every day that passes without a deal getting done increases the chances that another team swoops in with an offer Toronto can't or won't match. And the Red Sox have both the financial flexibility and the organizational need to make that kind of move. They're trying to build a championship contender. They've shown they're willing to spend big money on impact players. And adding Bichette would immediately upgrade their lineup while simultaneously weakening a division rival. That's the kind of move that changes the balance of power in the AL East. Mark Feinsand reported recently that Toronto's top priority remains re-signing Bichette, which is reassuring to hear. But then you've got other reporters like Ben Nicholson-Smith saying the priority might actually be starting pitching first, then figuring out the Bichette situation afterward. So here is conflicting information out there about what the front office is actually prioritizing, which creates this uncertainty that fans are left to interpret and worry about. The reality is Toronto has multiple massive decisions to make this offseason. They need to figure out the Bo situation. They're reportedly favorites to land Kyle Tucker in a trade. They need starting pitching depth. After what happened in the World Series exposed some rotation issues, they need bullpen help. They have to decide what to do with other free agents and arbitration-eligible players. It's a complex puzzle where every piece affects the others, and getting one thing wrong could cascade into multiple problems. What scares me most about the Red Sox interest is that Boston doesn't have the same emotional attachment to keeping Bo that Toronto does. For the Blue Jays, letting Bichette walk would be admitting that they couldn't keep their homegrown core together, that they couldn't capitalize on the window they built, that the World Series appearance was bigger. For Boston, signing him is just smart business. It's adding an all-star caliber player in his prime to a team trying to win championships. T here is no baggage, no history, no complicated feelings, just a straightforward calculation about whether he makes them better, and the answer is obviously yes. The Raisel Iglesias situation from yesterday adds another layer to understanding how Toronto is operating this offseason. There were initial reports that the Jays had made a $16 million offer for the reliever, but then Ben Nicholson-Smith clarified that they'd expressed interest but never actually made an offer. Iglesias ended up signing with the Braves for that $16 million. Now, some people might see Toronto not offering $16 million for a reliever as a bad sign, like they're being cheap or not willing to spend. I actually think it shows they're being smart about their priorities. $16 million for Raisel Iglesias is a lot of money for a reliever who had a 3.20 RAA last season. That's good, but not elite. And when you consider that Shane Bieber signed for essentially $12 million after his buyout, you start to realize that paying $16 million for a back-end reliever might not be the best allocation of resources when you have bigger holes to fill. The fact that Toronto expressed interest shows they're active in the market, but not making that specific offer shows they're not just throwing money around randomly. The bigger question is what all of this means for the overall offseason strategy. If Toronto is really serious about running it back with this core and building on the World Series appearance, they need to move decisively. They can't afford to wait around hoping Bo decides to take a hometown discount while teams like Boston are preparing serious offers. They can't sit back and watch the starting pitching market dry up while they're still figuring out their priorities. They need to be aggressive, proactive, and willing to spend the money required to keep this window open. What makes this whole situation even more complicated is that Bo Bichette has all the leverage right now. He barely played last season due to injury, but when he was healthy, he was productive. He hit a massive 3-run homer in Game 7 of the World Series on the biggest stage possible. He's young enough to sign a long-term deal, but proven enough that teams know what they're getting. He can afford to let the market develop, to see what offers come in, to play teams against each other, to maximize his value. That's exactly what his agent should be doing. But it's terrifying from a Blue Jays perspective, because every day this drags on is another day. Some other team can make their pitch. The prospect situation is actually a bright spot in all of this chaos. Toronto now has 6 top 100 worthy prospects in their system, which is a significant improvement from where they were a couple years ago. That gives them ammunition to make trades if they want to go that route. It gives them future assets to build around if they decide to pivot away from the current core. It provides organizational depth that can help weather injuries and unexpected setbacks. But prospects don't help you win right now. And right now is when Toronto needs to capitalize on this opportunity. Here is what I keep coming back to. The Blue Jays just proved they can compete for a championship. They got a Game 7 of the World Series. They showed T.